So, welcome back. It's not all good getting into part two here. The Europeans are going to be kind of isolated. They're forced to basically trade in and around Guangzhou or Canton, as we know it. Uh, but we're allowed to occupy local Macau as well, a port on the southern eastern coast of China. This is actually going to be a practice. Uh, Once they're expelled from, the majority of China, mainland China, they're going to be kind of just set up in this one port city. And that's going to carry on even with the Qing dynasty. We're going to see Japan emulate a similar strategy as well when it comes to dealing with Europeans, particularly the Portuguese. So some looked at that as like, you know, you're allowing barbarian influence to interact with China and kind of corrupting our values, our influence. You're degrading, um, you're degrading the prestige of China, and as a result of this, we start to see, uh, and that whether or not that's true, is up for historical debate. We'll see a little bit about that, I think, when we get into the English. Um, but what does absolutely happen is that the perfect storm hits. Uh, if you want the people to rise up and overthrow what you perceive to be an evil dynasty, a corrupt dynasty, you need certain things on your side. You have to see signs. There has to be, for lack of a better term, a superstitious element that is being met. And that's going to happen here for the Ming uh, and their downfall. So when they begin to decline, it's a gradual decline. During the late 16th century, internal power struggles are going to lead to a period of government corruption. And as we know, as governments get larger and more prosperous, corruption does eventually tend to spread. Taxes are higher. People are now paying money for services that they don't necessarily see, that aren't being spent on the services that are meant to be spent on the people. And this is caused in part by that corruption. This can lead to unrest amongst the peasant class, which is, let's be honest, the overwhelming majority of the population. Uh, the crops also take a hit. They decline because of harsh weather, and this is where things start to really come into play. When Mother Nature starts to act against you in the efficacy of your dynasty, this might be a sign that you, as an emperor, have lost the precious mandate of heaven, the mandate to rule. Uh, it gets worse. In the 1630s, a major epidemic greatly reduces the population in many areas. This suffering, all these elements combine and help spark a peasant revolt led by Li Zicheng. And Li Zicheng leads this sort of peasant revolt. Uh, and it kind of spreads throughout the country. It spreads pretty far and wide. It even makes its way up north to and around Beijing. This is important. We're going to get into that in a moment. So in 1644, Li and his forces occupy the capital of Beijing. So the capital falls. The last Ming emperor, so as to avoid humiliation or public execution or torture, as well as many of his other officials, choose to take their own lives. He personally will commit suicide in the Garden Palace. Now this sets the stage, because the overthrow by Li Zicheng and his peasants kind of leaves a vacuum. They are not going to be able to celebrate all that long after they've conquered Beijing, because they are weakened. They've been through this war. They've also weakened the army and the military of the Ming Dynasty. They helped overthrow it. So to the northeast of the Great Wall, by Beijing, are the Manchus, and they saw a golden opportunity here. This is an exhausted peasant army. And we're going to sweep down into Beijing and we're going to just mop up the remaining peasant force. And of course, they are victorious. They're not too dissimilar from the Mongols. You know, they are nomadic. I mean, they farm, but they're primarily nomadic. They're a hunting people. They are very efficient on a horseback. They're great with a bow and arrow. And so they're going to manage to sweep in and take over. And they're going to establish the Qing dynasty, or the Pure dynasty. And this will be a very long-lasting dynasty from 1644 until 1911. And they're not all that dissimilar from the Ming. They have a lot of similarities. There are some things that make them different. One, they're not native Chinese or Han Chinese. They are outsiders. They're considered barbarians by the majority Chinese people that they are now ruling over. So they have to prepare themselves for people who are going to resist. Here come yet another outside barbarian group north of the Great Wall that's going to try and take over. So they need to suppress. They put down one peasant revolt. Now they've really got to, drop the hammer here and make their presence known. So they're going to be resisted. All right. Some Chinese are going to seize the island of Taiwan, and the Manchu government is going to prepare to attack. So everybody outside of Taiwan is going to be ordered. This is a mandate that the Manchus have, is to adopt Manchu dress and their hairstyles, known as the Q, which is basically just you shave your entire head, and in the back, right on the top here, so you shave pretty much all around your head. You have just one long braid in the form of a pigtail. This is known as the Q, sometimes known as the Peking pineapple. And this is going to be a sign for those who are on their side. So when they go and invade and retake Taiwan, they're going to know who's with them and who's against them. As the famous saying went, lose your hair or lose your head. Because if you do not dress like us and if you do not wear your hair like us, we're just going to assume you're a rebel and you will be executed. So gradually, after much suppression, they will be accepted as the legitimate rulers, and the Qing dynasty will become the official dynasty, and once it's accepted, it will flourish. Now, they got a few things going against them. One, we need to restore peace and prosperity, but as Manchus, we only take up 2% of the population. So we're very much the powerful minority. So they're going to deal with this in this fact that we're ethnically and culturally different from our subject population in basically two different ways. So in order to restore peace and prosperity, we have to do a few things. So first, we're going to try and preserve our own distinct identity within the Chinese culture. All right. So we're going to be legally distinct from everyone else in China. Now, this actually works to their favor. One, it helps empower the Manchus, even elevate their position within society. And two, because you're making this distinction, you also are going to note that the Manchu nobility, because they're taking up they're distinct, they're the winners, they're the rulers, they're going to take up all the major land holdings. They're going to receive massive payouts from the state treasury. They're going to have the top government positions. They need to do something to win over the rest of the indigenous Han Chinese people to their right to rule, to their mandate of heaven. So you do this by taking about 50%, all right? 50% of the mid to high posts, and you give about 80% of the lower posts to Chinese, and you make sure that, although it's a much smaller share, you do make sure that you have some, Han Chinese in some of the major top positions as well within the government. So that leads us to this guy right here, Kang Shi. Once again, long rule equals stability. For the Qing, he is one of the, and all of China really, he's considered to be one of the greatest emperors. He is politically skilled, he's a strong character, he takes charge of the government while he's still in his teens, he's quite young. I think he's actually being groomed to rule around the age of 7. And Kangxi has a grandson, Qianlong, who's very similar in many aspects, including, being set up to rule from a very young age, like around 7, and then kind of officially taking the reins when you're, in your teens. So Kangxi, 61 years on the throne, not too shabby. He had an incredible work ethic, long days, long nights. He believed that one act of negligence may cause sorrow all through the country, and one moment of negligence may result in trouble for thousands of generations. So he took his position as emperor very seriously. He put down unrest along the northern and western frontiers by force. He has a very clear idea of how the northern barbarian tribes passed the Great Wall Act. He's Manchu, so he's very familiar with the Mongols and other similar groups. He's also a patron of the arts and letters, and this is what's going to gain him serious support amongst the scholarly class, the elites, the well-read, the intelligentsia, if you will, of Chinese society. Not bad friends to have. And during his reign, he's actually going to settle a dispute between China and Russia. The Treaty of Nerchinsk. This is going to actually be very unique. This stops Russia from pushing too far into China's protected territories in search of trade routes. So what it's going to do is it stops Russia pushing east, it ends the frontier wars between them, and it gives Russia a unique status that no European country has, which is that they can freely trade within the Chinese empire. They're not just sort of relegated to certain port cities like Macau, the way other European powers are. You'll also see during Kangxi's reign that it's the efforts of Christian missionaries, particularly the Portuguese, reaches a new height. The emperor is very tolerant of Christians, which is, we're going to see going forward, unusual. Particularly in Japan, it gets pretty ugly. And several hundred officials become Catholics. We see several 100,000 ordinary Chinese become Catholic. But we're going to start to see that, they weren't as successful as they could have been because, once again, Protestants and Catholics are competing against one another and spreading Christianity. It's after Kangxi that we start to see, other emperors kind of suppressing Christian activities. Too much influence. The worship of this Christian god actually seems to undermine certain beliefs about the mandate of heaven. That, this guy that you're talking about, Jesus, being the Son of God, well, there's only one Son of Heaven, and it's the Emperor of China. And so we're going to actually see that in his grandson, Qianlong. And Qianlong rules also for a very long period of time, leading to some serious stability. The empire reaches its greatest physical size during his reign. And China experiences a great period of both prosperity as well as decay and decline during his reign. If we can think back to the Middle Eastern empires, the gunpowder empires, the Ottoman Empire, the same is very true for when Suleiman reigned. Greatest height, but also a lot of underlying decay and issues that would not be addressed, and after his death, they're only going to be more and more pronounced. Stay tuned for part 3.